like to acknowledge my former professor, Mr. Steve Mullen, Econ Salt, University of Pennsylvania Feld Center of Government. Thanks for joining us. Now I really have to be on my A game, so we're going to ask for the 676ers to please come back to the panel, and then we'll have this round, and the chair recognizes I guess no members have any questions? Questions, comments from members? I just had one question and it may have been asked early on, Mr. Michael Carroll, just around traffic and the traffic study, that's all. Mr. Carroll, just give us an update, and I think this question might have been asked for you in the past, but it's been discussed amongst members as recently as yesterday. Just your perspective on the current traffic plan that was proposed, and then also I know there's a traffic study that we're waiting for that has to be signed off by the Streets Department and PennDOT. It's PennDOT and the Streets Department, correct? Or
That's
what
correct.
department of the city?
Yeah, first of all, Mike Carroll, Deputy Managing Director for the Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability. Not sustainability, Traffic and Infrastructure System, sorry.
Okay, and then also talk about how the traffic study and plan that's signed off by the Streets Department and PennDOT, how does that play into the overall proposal?
So in order for the project to get its permits in terms of construction, they have to first get through PennDOT's highway occupancy permit process. And the way that we've approached that, PennDOT has been the lead agency, and they have incorporated comments both from the Philadelphia Streets Department and SEPTA in the work that they're doing towards completing the traffic impact study, which will satisfy both state, PennDOT, and city Streets Department requirements. So that's an ongoing process. There was a conversation reviewing comments, I believe, as recently as last week. And so we're making good progress, but we just want to make sure we're thorough. All the details in the study, all the assumptions in the study address the points that the public entities have been raising.
So in the event that the study isn't done prior to us, in the event that this has the votes to get voted on, what happens in terms of still making sure that the project has a traffic plan that's conducive to traffic efficiency in that area?
Yeah, so that is a PennDOT requirement, that the level of service analysis, which deals with the level of congestion, is addressed. And so that means that the Sixers have to go back and look at the mitigation measures that will be effective intersection by intersection, but it also incorporates the things that we've been talking about in terms of the mode share being met. And specifically, I've mentioned before, the requirement that there's a transportation event management plan. And like we talked about last time, and especially in the context of the Arena Services District, that is a living document, and it establishes roles and responsibilities that continue throughout the operation of the arena for 30 years to make sure that there's always feedback that's taken from the community, from businesses, from city council, from the administration, and the details of operation every year are reset and replanned so that effectively the congestion, the quality of life issues that are related to that are all being addressed in real time.
In the event that the Sixers don't meet the criteria for the Streets Department and PennDOT, what happens?
They will not get a highway occupancy permit, and so that will prevent them from getting the construction going, getting the building permits and so forth. But that's a state requirement.
Okay, thank you. The chair recognizes Councilman Jamie Gauthier.
Do you have a timeline for when we should expect the updated traffic study?
I would not want to guess. I think, in my opinion, we're probably, weeks, maybe a month or two away from having that wrapped up. But it's, the cake is done when it's baked, and so that's kind of the way we look at this stuff. The questions need to be responded to the satisfaction of the Streets Department, to the satisfaction of PennDOT. And, I can't dictate to PennDOT when they're satisfied with what they see or not. And I should mention SEPTA as well. They're at the table. The operations folks are at the table. A lot of the issues that SEPTA's looking at in that context have to deal with the way the pedestrians would circulate both around the arena and then into the concourse. So there's some details that require a little bit of refinement in the models that are being used, and that's technical work that just has to be completed.
I think this is one of the most challenging parts of the project for me, especially because the impact study says that there are two things from which Chinatown and surrounding neighborhoods won't be able to come back from if they reach a tipping point. And as I recall, one of those things was sort of small business interruption, and the other thing was traffic. The fact that that was given such a prominent place in the impact study as something, if we don't get right, can lead to the complete displacement of Chinatown, makes me feel like we should be reasonably certain that traffic will work in this area. And this is, an area that we've all traveled around because City Hall is right here. On a normal day, there are traffic issues in this area without putting 18,000 additional people here. I'm challenged by the sequencing of, why does the administration think that we should approve the project before we have the traffic plan?
Yeah, so I think, like many things, it's about understanding what an appropriate and reasonable level of comfort is. And no one can tell you what it's going to be like until it starts to happen, which is another reason why that management plan is so important, which is another reason why having the services district is so important. But the sense that I have in talking with folks at PennDOT, some of the folks involved in this traffic impact study process is that we feel very confident that if we can hit those mode share numbers, that 40%, this is going to be pretty straightforward from perspective of traffic. We start to lose that confidence, and the sensitivity tests we did in the independent analysis show that there are some real congestion effects that take place when you fall below that 40%. And so that sort of is the guarantee we're hoping we can get. We can do everything we can to make sure that SEPTA has the capacity available and people are choosing that as their mode of transportation. But, to put it in context, and I've looked at this a couple different ways, you are correct. There are currently, especially in the morning rush, especially around lunchtime, especially around evening, congestion issues which we experience every day in the life of a downtown, in the life of Center City. And the thing that we have to reflect on is we're adding about, 20,000 people to an area which has a population of 200,000 people and which has about 300,000 jobs located in it. So that increment, if it came in the middle of the morning rush, it would have a really strong impact. If it came, in the middle of lunchtime, it would have a really strong impact. If it came all at once in the evening, it would have a strong impact. But the biggest increment of traffic that we see is going to be people who are leaving garages that are sort of in a ring around the arena, probably around 10 p.m., between 10 p.m. and midnight. And so there's some margin for error that's built into that time frame because especially during a weekday night, you don't really have a lot going on necessarily in terms of existing congestion in Chinatown or Washington West or sort of Market East. There's capacity to work with. You get into a little bit of a situation on Friday nights where, okay, people are hanging around a little bit more. And so we want to have that ultimate confidence that that works well. And that's where having that transit capacity comes in. And it prevents us from having to do some pretty extraordinary things in order to make sure everything works. So, the tools are there. We can divert traffic, we can shut segments of street down, we can hold people in garages for a half hour, we can do all kinds of things that are kind of exotic to make sure that the street network works, but we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that extraordinary stuff to make sure that the congestion impacts don't affect these neighborhoods, don't affect the businesses in these neighborhoods. And one of the really beautiful things about the way that the Arena Services District was set up is that district can kind of pull the trigger on that kind of stuff. And it can do so in the context of conversations that are taking place between members of the communities, small businesses, with the Sixers at the table, with City Council at the table, and those decisions can manage those trade-offs in real time. So that gives us even more of a safety margin in terms of how that actual impact is felt on those Friday nights, when the games let out or the concerts lets out. It becomes a lot easier, and it's a lot more of a no-brainer if that transit capacity is there. But like you heard earlier, the conversation between the Sixers and the SEPTA staff is ongoing, and we're starting to look a little bit more closely at the information that was presented in the white paper. So these ideas about whether we can store trains at Powelton Yards or at Roberts Yards, which aren't too far away, something we had thought about too. And that's not necessarily completely straightforward, but it starts to look at a different, say, margin of error again between what the SEPTA folks looked at in the first place, because they have to look at the most challenging situation in the analysis that they did and they presented before council a couple weeks ago. We can look at what the most impactful trains are going to be, and there's probably about 4 or 5 lines which are going to carry the lion's share of people to and from Philadelphia out to the suburbs. But they had looked at 12 different lines. And so the difference in trying to figure out how to get more capacity later trains on 4 or 5 lines is a little bit different order of magnitude than what they looked at when they were looking at the whole group of 12 lines, even some lines which maybe even carrying about, less than 100 people after these games. So when we dig into these details, we can sort of reestablish that confidence. And from what I see, we're getting back to a point where we can feel fairly comfortable that reasonable efforts can be made to manage this kind of traffic, to manage these kinds of impacts on these neighborhoods without us having to get really exotic in real time.
One last follow-up question, because you brought up a good point about the 40% transit ridership. Has Otis received a realistic plan for how we would get, assuming in a magic world where SEPTA had the money or where we can increase service, has Otis received a realistic plan on how we get 40% of the people visiting the arena to take SEPTA, particularly based on the fact that near 90% of your current customers drive? How do we, is there a plan for shifting that behavior? And if so, what is it?
So I think it's pretty realistic that 40% of the people would naturally take SEPTA if the capacity is there. And that's what we saw in the traffic impact study at a real high level. In the sensitivity analysis, we dug even deeper. And what you're seeing is that in arenas that are built in downtowns where transit exists, you get about 40% who are taking traffic under normal situations. So when you look at San Francisco, when you look at Brooklyn, when you look at Boston, when you look at DC, that's kind of how things fall. The difference is whether that capacity exists or not. And that's the thing that SEPTA is raising. They're not making a case that people won't use transit. They're making a case that we need to have the trains for people to sit in or stand in and get out of town. And that's where they're saying they think most of the people will want to use regional rail. And so where things come together is just making sure that enough of that capacity is there. So it was never really incumbent on the Sixers to, in detail, describe how a person gets out of their seat and gets in a train. That kind of happens anyway. That's just a natural course when people realize it's a better experience for them to get out of town, to get to the suburbs on a train than to have to wait on 676, which again, on a Friday night, whether there's a Sixers game or not, you're going to spend a lot of time, trying to get to the Schuylkill Expressway to get out to the suburbs. Time-wise, it makes sense. Cost-wise, you can save yourself the cost of parking in a garage. So it just is kind of like the natural thing that we're seeing happens with these kinds of arenas.
I would say in this instance, it's more critical because of the trauma center and because of the fact that traffic can lead to displacement in Chinatown and the neighborhood and other areas. So it's less of a situation where we can organically just watch to see if it happens. If it doesn't happen, we're in trouble. So that's why it seems like we would need an actual plan if we're seeing different behavior in South Philadelphia where there is adequate transit.
If I could respond. When we've talked to the emergency services folks, when we've talked to Jefferson Hospital, they don't see an issue. In terms of emergency response, there's no path from the array of fire stations, ambulance facilities that's going to be blocked off by congestion in this area. Getting through this area is not different than it is getting through the area, again, during the AM rush or the PM rush. You have uniformed officers on the street across this network that can shut down traffic in one direction and quickly route emergency vehicles where they need to go through this area. People might have thought I was crazy when I said 10th Street being shut down could make things go faster, but in fact, like I'm saying, you've got people with badges and guns stopping traffic that gets in the way of an ambulance, and that vehicle that needs to use 10th Street has a corridor that's just open for their use to get down to Jefferson Hospital. So these factors are important to put that kind of a question in perspective. And also, I just want to be clear. I think the levels of traffic that we're talking about, probably about 2,000 or 3,000 cars after 10 p.m. on a Friday night in an area which may be busy anyway, it's not gonna displace people. It may make getting around more congested, but worst case that we see around here is something like I've pointed out as an Eagles game in the Stadium District. You've got about 70,000 people 80,000 people in the stadium. You've got Xfinity Live going on. You've got tailgating and parking lots all around there, and it takes on average about 90 minutes to get that cleared out after an Eagles game. So this is about a fifth, a quarter of that amount of space. There's more street to go with. The transit is better here. So there might be a half hour where you've got a situation which is needing to be managed, but I don't see that as a factor that's going to displace businesses, especially at that time of day when most businesses are probably closing down.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Rulandau.
Ready? Thank you, Council President. First question, thanks for being here. Follow-up to the Sixers from the previous session. You've talked a lot about when construction will happen on the arena, and you said nothing would happen kind of outwardly on the street until after all of our festivities are done in 2026. You might do some internal stuff. Do you know when construction would start on the parcels on the south side of Market Street and potentially even the hotel that would be at 8th and Market?
Thank you for the question. So with regards to the hotel at Goldenberg, we don't, we can't speak for them, but we do know that they are interested in moving forward in earnest. For our parcels on the south side of the street, there would be phase, right? So from a market perspective, the ability of the market to absorb units or space is obviously constrained, so you wouldn't want to dump a number of buildings on the market at the same time. So we would look to focus on the building likely directly across the street from the arena, between 10th and 11th first. Exactly when that would come online, I don't have an answer, but the idea would be that it would come on in short order with the arena coming on so that you have the street presence, and so you have the symbiotic relationship across the street. And then we would build on that with another building thereafter.
But to be clear, you think after the festivities or before? I'm just curious.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, after. So, and I think you're referring to some of our written responses with regards to 2026, and
Yes.
I do want to acknowledge that. So we heard the concerns. It wasn't the first time we heard the concerns, but we did go back and spend some time with our construction managers. And while we do need to start the demolition in the first half of 2026. We believe that we can do most of that work prior to the summer internal. And so minimizing impacts on sidewalks, street closures, utilizing the existing truck tunnel as a way to get materials in and out of the space. And so we don't believe that for the arena particularly, we will have a large impact prior to the festivities. And for the south side, those developments also would start after it.
Okay, and just a quickie for Mr. Carroll, thank you for being here. You talked about the cake is done when it's baked. I've been on a theme today of showing my frustration about how all of this is coming to us at the end of a timeline where we've actually been talking about this for a couple of years, where we don't have traffic plans and whatnot already to us, full traffic plans, full SEPTA plans, full, a lot of plans. But when a clarifying question, you talk about 10th and 11th Street potentially being shut off for emergency vehicles. Do you mean always being closed only for emergency vehicles, or only when an emergency vehicle needs to go down it?
So there'll be a lane closure, so there'll be a single lane for buses and emergency vehicles during the events.
Oh, just one lane will be shut?
Yeah, that's my understanding on both
Okay.
streets.
So then in order to make it only buses and emergency vehicles, when I visualized it, it seems that then we'd have to have police at many intersections telling folks who are going east and west, for example, you can't turn left or right up these streets. Have you quantified the overtime cost for the police department to ensure that we are only keeping this one lane?
Yeah, there are estimates of that. Those estimates have a range. Just, at a high level, what I've seen is in the low five-figure numbers per event.
And just wanted to underscore one last thing, that we talked about changing behavior to use public transit, but that's what SEPTA's talking about. SEPTA says we can't just change behavior until the system is in the place. It's like, what's coming first, the cart or the horse? SEPTA says in order to change behavior, we need a strong investment in the transit authority in order for people to have great experiences and then know that they want to take this ride. But it just doesn't happen that naturally. It's the same as, I appreciate the cleaning and greening so much of what we're doing in the city, but what we really want to do is to tell people also to stop littering. And they come hand in hand, and they have to happen. So I don't know that that's natural. I think you have to put a little work into it. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Carroll and Mr. Gould, would part of your plan be to do a campaign to change the culture and the mind state of traveling to the games as opposed to driving, which was actually help our environment? I just want to ask that as a follow-up question to Councilman Rulandau. And then also the Chase Center, right? From my understanding, has a hospital across the street from it. Do you know anything about that particular site? Are the streets larger, smaller? Is it in comparison to what we have here in the city of Philadelphia? When they have games there, are people prohibited, or not prohibited, but are there obstacles to people going to the emergency room at the Chase Center that's across the street from an actual hospital? Just give me some clarity on that in terms of your study on those two issues.
Sure, great question. So we spent a considerable amount of time with the folks who developed Chase Center, listening to them, asking them questions. They went through the exact same process. The city and the community stakeholders had the exact same concerns. The hospital had the exact same concerns. And they went through the same process that we have gone through and are going through with regards to communicating with the hospital, communicating with the stakeholders, putting these plans in place throughout the course of both entitlements, design, approvals, and then ongoing. And the feedback that we've gotten is that the issues have been manageable. The traffic has been, manageable, and that particularly as it relates to the hospital, there have been no material issues with regards to access to their level 1 trauma center.
I'm dressed nice, and I got that drip on like the residents from the 5th Councilmanic District, and I chose to. How you going to encourage me
Yeah. So
to
great
get on the
question.
train to not only go to the Sixers game, but to go see the Locks or Lil Baby downtown? How are we going to work on the campaign to change the culture of someone coming from the suburbs, right, to Center City? What would that look like?
Sure. It's, I think, a combination of things. It's education, it's convenience, and it's coordination. So there's things that, whether it's Chase Center in San Francisco or Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle or TD Garden in Boston have done to help incentivize and communicate the use of transit. So it comes down to things like having your website be very clear about how you can get there, having ticket information when you get an email before you're going to an event, how you can communicate on the ticket, ways you can utilize mass transit, integrating the actual game pass to use conceptually, so outside of fares, but just when you scan the pass, can the ticket be used to scan for SEPTA, so it's a seamless process. It's one that's convenient, that people want to use. Those are all things that have been instituted. Climate Pledge Arena hired a team internally to develop a transit app that they used to help facilitate that process. Other things regarding communication in terms of radio ads, or we have various marketing efforts that happen, and incorporating know before you go type information would all be part of our plan. And to answer your question, there will and would be a plan. Do we have that plan today of exactly how that will be communicated? No, but it will certainly be there prior to opening day.
In the spirit of Council Member Jones, the Chair of Public Safety, and I see you have Captain Rusho there as well, how would, and this probably is more of a conversation with SEPTA as well, but you would have to be working together, reassure people that coming in the city or just while you're in the city, riding SEPTA is safe. And I have some brave council members who just took the subway, the Market Street L, to the press conference with Josh Shapiro, and so they said no problem, and this is nothing new to them, but to other individuals who need to be reassured that getting on SEPTA is safe to go to the game. I would think there would have to be some type of synergy between Patco Speed Line, SEPTA, and 76th Place to reinforce to people that it's okay to come on the subway.
I'm sorry, you finished?
Go ahead.
You're absolutely correct. We have to work with SEPTA. SEPTA is actively working with the Philadelphia Police, with Commissioner Bethel. And there's two things, right? We have to make sure when we're communicating these plans that you as a ticket holder take this level of transportation instead of driving. And in those PSAs and in any communication, we have to think about the safety of the arena arrival person, the ticket holder, being safe coming, and then being safe when they're there. And I think right now, I'm friends with the SEPTA police chief, and they're trying to do everything possible. They know that safety and security is paramount, right? It's the Maslow theory. If people aren't safe, they're not going to go anywhere. So we have to make sure that that's a paramount need. And there's things afoot right now with, for example, on Broad Street, Avenue of the Arts, where there's a group that is paying for police overtime right now because they can't get people to go to Stake 48. They can't get condos filled. The people from the burbs hear one thing on the news and they're afraid to come down. So how do you make people feel safe? What are they doing? They're doing exactly what we're going to be doing. They're hiring Center City District safety ambassadors on bicycle patrol, so they're very visible and very up and down. as well as the Philadelphia Police. So they're literally paying for that overtime because Kevin Bethel will tell you he's 1,300 officers down. So that's another whole thing that hopefully, obviously, by the time we open, that, you know, the movement will have changed where people want to become police officers again, but that's clearly another area. But otherwise, you are, you know, paying overtime to have people come to your establishment. So that's I mean, what you're describing is literally over on Broad Street right now, not so much with the SEPTA angle, but Avenue of the Arts is trying to get people to come and see, you know, the plays and the orchestra, and they're having some issues.
On any given weekend, it's pretty crowded out there on the Avenue of the Arts. But also, I think it goes to another conversation, and we've talked about my position around SEPTA, and if you're charging other sports teams similar to requiring the Sixers to pay for additional operations costs. But if we need additional police officers, right, that's coming out of the city of Philadelphia's budget, correct? For operation during those games and those concerts? I mean, that's a cost to us as a result of, we're not even talking about the SEPTA folks, we're just talking about us as the city of Philadelphia.
So that's the conversation that's continuing to be ongoing with regards to who's responsible for what.
We like to have that answer like ASAP, because I know we're going around, but at the end of the day, that's questions we're having amongst ourselves that we should be clear of moving forward.
Understood.
In the spirit of my public safety chairman. I have one more. A point of information, Councilman Jamie Gaultier.
I just wanted to make the point that a part of this is about sequencing. So if we're making the comparison to San Francisco and the Chase Center, the appropriate comparison is whether San Francisco approved that facility before they had a traffic plan or a plan for transit. Do we know if that happens?
Because I don't know the planning folks over there. But Councilman Squillis not here. He did do his research with the individuals from Chase Bank to probably be more appropriate to answer, but.
I don't know the specific answer. We can look into it and get back to you. To the extent that is helpful, the sequencing, as you brought up, is key, right? And so how and when things happen and when they're possible to happen. So we understand and we hear the obvious, you know, concerns and hesitation from members of council with regards to this. From my perspective and from the perspective of real estate development, this kind of speaks to some of the things Mike was referencing earlier of we won't get our permits for construction if we don't provide a traffic plan that's acceptable to the streets department and PennDOT. So there are things that happen along the way that don't necessarily or can't necessarily happen on day one, but are required to happen along the way.
Thank you. Commissioner Rene Garcia, please join the panel. Ms. Garcia, just state your title for the record, please.
Good afternoon, Renee Garcia, City Solicitor.
Thank you. City Solicitor, the Chief Lawyer for the City of Philadelphia, correct?
Correct.
Administration and members of council, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Just want to delve into the EOP, the accountability around the EOP. So just give us an overview from your perspective, the clawbacks, penalties, accountability, in the event that 76ers Place, if this moves forward, don't reach their goals for minority participation, and then also, what are the clawbacks and accountability measures that the administration will be enforcing on the EOP team around this particular project?
Thank you, Council President. I'm joined by Nicole Stokes, Assistant City Solicitor, who is our resident expert on the EOP and OEO.
So there are
for the record, my name is Nicole Stokes, an attorney in the law department. So there are multiple different enforcement mechanisms that we do have the authority to enforce. It would be in conjunction with the Sixers. However, it has been incorporated into both the agreement and the EOP itself. And so that looks like withholding payment from contractors. That looks like a kind of like a remedial plan. The good thing about this EOP in this context is that there's a ton of data and reporting. And so we should be able to see everything in somewhat real time so that there can be corrective action that's taken. And it would be in conjunction with all of the parties involved. It's also important to note that there are, we have actually added terms to the EOP, which specifically give the Oversight Committee enforcement rights over enforcing penalties, also enumerated in 1600 as well. Council can, by hearing, also call a resolution so that there can be remedies enforced.
Just want to clarify that for the record. Also, in terms of the participation goals, and obviously there's some thought that those goals should be increased. Just give us a perspective on how you came up with the goals, and then also break down the individual categories. Specifically, there's a interest regarding making sure Asian and Latinos play a particular role in terms of how we go about the building of 76th Place.
And I will try to get to both of those questions. And so as far as for implementation and how the goals were created, it was in conjunction with both the administration and the Sixers themselves. We did self-studies. We leveraged industry experts as well. The Sixers did their own independent study as well. And so through those conversations, it was agreed upon that these goals were also ambitious. We also considered pipeline programs, what we believe the state of our community will be at the time, and then we also based it on historical data as well.
Now, I know the Sixers and the administration worked on this together. Now, I kind of look at some of it like the chicken in the hen house, right? Because the Sixers are helping coming up with doing a self-analysis of the goals that you're going to basically set for this development project. So just give us an idea, David, on past minority participation goals that your company has reached.
So the question, Council President, is past goals that our company has reached for other development projects?
Yes, sir. On average, that's all, David.
On average, yeah. So in terms of other development projects, I don't have, the only other development project would be, for the Sixers would be Camden, which I don't have, but I believe we have numbers on our GC.
Camden would be a great example because that's
Right.
a recent development project that you've done.
Right, and I don't have the as I mentioned, I'm not sure what the EOP or what EOPs were in place for that, so I don't have the tracking, but.
Can you provide it to members of council, please?
We can follow up with that. You want to talk about Turner?
Part of the work that we did with regards to looking at what do we think is A, attainable, but B, also aspirational, was working with our partners at Turner Construction to look at the construction of sports and entertainment facilities across the country and how those goals have been set.
Does Turner have a track record of hiring black people, people of color? And do you know the percentages that they actually
I can't
average?
speak to that, but I can get back to you.
Okay.
What we do have is the goals that were set for specific projects, maybe not the company as an entirety, but specific projects that are comparable to ours of other sports entertainment facilities across the country, and both what they set as goals as well as what they achieved in their in their projects, and that informed what we proposed was used here.
I do want to go on a record because there is a grave concern to make sure that we aren't just making promises. Now, obviously, I believe the administration, I believe wholeheartedly, and our mayor, and why she's at the helm to make sure we move forward aggressively to make sure black and brown people and women have a seat at the table. And we also want to make sure that what's inside the EOP is actualized. Like, we actually get a chance to look back, and so when people come down here testifying in good faith and supporting the project, particularly the black young men, and I'm just speaking amongst how we're talking amongst ourselves, they're not giving false sense of hope, right? And so part of the concern and conversation we're having amongst ourselves is making sure that those actual numbers are actualized and really have an impact. And I also, again, say that I know for a fact in working in partnership with our mayor, while she's there, will be supportive. But at some point in time, after she moves on, we still have to make sure we're aggressive about reaching those participation goals, regardless of who's at the helm of the city of Philadelphia. And so the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, hence why I asked those particular questions, and really would like to see what the numbers look like at Camden.
And I would just add that the goals that Alex referenced that we looked at in our research, to your point, Council President, we want to set aggressive but attainable goals. For each goal that we set based on the comparisons that we looked at, we are at or above them. In addition to that, that is why we want to make sure we also had a plan for how to accomplish those goals, which, as we've talked about, is why we started investing in creating various efforts and initiatives and organizations to achieve those. So we start to invest in the pipeline of businesses and individuals who can work on this project far in advance of us putting shovels in the ground, because if we wait until we're ready to issue contracts, if we haven't readied those business for that at that point in time, then we've failed.
And go on the record and talk about those efforts.
Sure. Everybody Builds is probably the most tangible example of that. So in November of 2021, understanding the dynamic that I just described, we knew that we needed given we didn't have a project to put people to work on in order to help start building their capacity, we needed a vehicle to start investing in and building the capacity of both the workforce as well as the contractors who would ultimately work on the project once we start construction in 2026. What we did is we convened labor organizations, general contractors, including the General Building Contractors Association, as well as various developers and owners who control and were in the process of, that had active projects in Philadelphia at the time. That includes Jefferson, Penn, Wexford, Hillco, Mosaic, and folks of that nature. What we talked about was finding a more collaborative way to work together to build the overall capacity of diverse contractors and workers in the industry, knowing that oftentimes you have efforts that are tied to a single project. The challenge with that being is that once that project is over, the program disappears. And so you don't have a sustainable program. Also, if you have an apprentice or a contractor that worked on that one project, it doesn't guarantee that they have the relationships or the next project to go to that will help sustain their career or sustain their business. And so the idea with Everybody Builds is that we're creating more of an ecosystem between contractors, labor, and owners so that businesses and workers can cycle from project to project and also have support so they don't fall through the cracks because of a lack of resources or people in their network that would allow them for that work and to be able to work on those projects.
Thank you. And before I go off to my next member, Ms. Garcia, could you just elaborate on part of the CBA focuses on two particular areas that the mayor dedicated funding for. One for small businesses being ready to do business in the event that this project moves forward. And then there's another category that focuses on providing support for binding lines of credit for small businesses who want to participate. Can y'all elaborate on those two key areas, which are normally barriers to participating in such projects?
Thank you, Council President. I'm going to call up Sophie Bryan.
Council President, Sophie Bryan, Chief Policy Officer. So those two specific lines in the CBA, and I want to, just if I may, add in an additional line, for instance, the City College for Municipal Employment and Power Up Your Business, which I think the mayor also sees as contributing to building the capacity of the businesses, the employers, and also potentially some of the employees who will work on this project. So let's start with a smaller one, the Business Barriers Fund. Idea here is $1 million, and this really should work in concert with some of the activity that the Sixers talked about and that Mosaic talked about when they were testifying, to have sort of overarching plans, programs, funds that will assist businesses in getting bonding and getting insurance and getting connected to accounting services so they're able to access the contracting opportunities both from the Arena project and then maybe as importantly or more importantly, the ancillary development that we think is going to happen up and down Market Street. So it's sort of just as the Sixers are thinking with Everybody Builds, start laying that foundation now so businesses have access to the technical assistance, the supports, the capital literally that's needed to have them ready to access these opportunities. For the business readiness program, that, as you know, is sort of allocated in the CBA right now as an overall line item that would be executed in partnership with the Diverse Chambers Coalition, which includes, of course, the African American Chamber, but also the Greater Hispanic Chamber, the Asian American Chamber, and the Independence Business Alliance. And I think, Council President, for that, we know that under Regina Hairston's leadership, the African American Chamber has already been working with the Sixers on doing a sort of landscape scan and assessing both barriers and successful programs to help diverse businesses access opportunity. We're interested, obviously, in working in partnership with the Diverse Chambers Coalition to build out what the programming would be that's supported by that line item. So just in transparency, it's not fully programmed right now because the intent of the administration is to learn from those that are doing the work with the intended beneficiaries about how best to structure it.
Okay. Thank you very much. The chair recognizes Councilmember Jeffrey J. Young.
Thank you, Mr. President. So first question I have is regarding the EOP. Must have missed something. It said the EOP enforcement is in conjunction with the Sixers. Is that correct, or is that, did I mishear?
Yes, so with the Sixers being a party as well, we have the authority to say, yes, we do want to enforce a remedy, but them being primarily the payer of said contractor or subcontractor, it would be in conjunction with them to withhold payment, but it's also important to note that they are obligated under the agreement, and it's incorporated into the terms of the main agreement as well to give us that right and enforce the EOP as well.
So they have to agree with the city to enforce the EOP? Because what if they say, you know what, nah, I don't want to enforce on a particular contract?
A violation of the EOP is a violation of the sublease.
Okay.
Right, so logistically, they have to be the one to withhold the payment, but they are obligated under their agreements to withhold that payment if that is the decision that either it goes through OEO or City Council or through the committee. However that decision is rendered, they are the ones to implement, but they are bound to do that.
All right, and I just read in the sublease that I guess our remedy would be a specific performance, right? We have to sue them to get them to do what we want to do. That's the only remedy that's available. Okay, thank you. That's the only question on the EOP. I have a question about the traffic. It was mentioned that education is a way to, I guess, help curb the traffic issues that's associated with, the users of the arena. But who is responsible for that? Who is responsible for educating the public, and who pays for that?
That's our responsibility, and we would be paying for it.
Is that somewhere in this agreement?
Mike can confirm, but with regards to the TIS and the temp, there are outlines in there for all of these provisions of things that we would do or be obligated to do. So it's not specific to X, Y, or Z today, but the concepts of education and communication are in there as requirements for us.
Is that a part of the, will be a part of the traffic management plan that we talked about like last week or whatever that is?
That's right.
That group of folks that's going to be paid for out of the CBA money?
Yeah, it could be, but just to reinforce what Alex is saying here, it would be a condition of the permit from PennDOT. So it would be a legal requirement that PennDOT would impose as part of them getting their permit. So that condition can be honored by it being in the traffic event management planning. It can be honored by it being under the purview of the Arena Services District and paid through the CBA. The Sixers have an opportunity to supplement that as well. Whether it's in the agreement, I guess, is a wholly separate matter, though.
I don't think it's separate. I think this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the traffic management. We're talking about these things. And
it's duplicative in that sense, then. That's what I'm saying. You have these various layers and avenues where that can be required, re-required.
Chair recognizes Councilmember Mark Squilla, sponsor of the bill.
There you go. I know as part of the plan, it needs to be approved by PennDOT. So there is a traffic, transportation, street access plan that has to be approved. And if it's not approved, they cannot access a building permit.
That's right.
So until it is approved, there is no way they could start development on that project. So I think at the end of the day, the accountability is making sure that PennDOT is approving that plan. And then afterwards, as we put into the legislation, where there would be a yearly report. So even after it's approved by PennDOT, the Controller's Office would then do a yearly report to report back to us if that plan is working, and then it has to be adjusted yearly in order to address the PennDOT approvals.
Absolutely, that's right.
Yeah, and I understand that point with the PennDOT approval of a plan, but you're asking us to support something without having that PennDOT approval yet. And yeah, so that's I mean, I guess that's a part of the point that I'm making is, you know, you're asking us to support this traffic plan without having any idea on, again, who is paying for it. So it's all idealistic right now. It's, you know, it's a part of this plan, it's a part of that agreement, it could be a part of the PennDOT traffic plan, it could be here, it could be there. Where for me, it's like, let's put it in the agreement, let's put it in writing so we can see exactly what we are holding you accountable to.
Councilmember, fair point. I am searching my memory for all 185 pages of the sublease, and
I'm looking at it. We can read it together.
My memory is not what it was before I had children, but we will follow up in writing to confirm that.
Point of information. Councilmember Young, what page is that?
I'm not on that right now. I'm on my next question. I'm on my next question about the technical assistance.
If you had memorized the page numbers, I would be very
I'm on page
intimidated right now.
120 right now about the technical assistance on my next question.
Yes, thank you.
Chair recognizes Councilmember Young.
Thank you. Another question I have is about the technical assistance in the CBA. I mean, we're looking for, I guess CBA says, best and good faith efforts, right, with the solicitation. But have you all or worked with the city already to kind of try to start identifying who these people are, who the vendors are, who because I think if this passes, like, it's just going to be, folks will be chopping at the bits to get this work, right? And so we want to make sure that the businesses that you're going to target are already ready, right? Because the construction timeline says June 1, 2026. I mean, that's right around the corner. And to get these businesses ready that you would need to in order to comply with your EOP standards, it could take more time than that. And so I just want to see where you are, where the city is, right, on identifying some of these contractors, subcontractors, those that are in the mechanical trades and whatnot that have the ability to compete for this contract. We want to make sure that everyone is on equal footing and have the opportunity to compete for some of these funds.
Yep. Excuse me, great question. And your line of thinking is exactly where our head has been, and reflects some of the homework that we did. And I should have addressed this earlier when the council president was asking about how we got to the numbers. In the spirit of ensuring that the goals that we put forth, which are aggressive, are also attainable, one of the exercises that we did in partnership with our pre-construction GC is reaching out to and speaking with a number of MBE and WBE businesses because we wanted to have confidence that the numbers we were setting, there would be businesses out there who are, one, interested in the work, two, have the capability of working on a project such as an arena build, and three, also have the capacity to do so. What those conversations also informed us of is what is their contracting capacity and what do they think they would be interested in taking on. And that also informs, again, not just do we feel confident about the numbers being attainable, but also what are the different ways that we may need to structure contracting packages to make sure they have access to the projects?
Kim Stokes.
May I add a little bit of this is, and I'm not the person to speak to all of this, but there is really a mosaic of programs going on throughout the city to make businesses ready. So we have programs in commerce, we have minority business success, right? There's a lot of going on throughout CCME and, you know, everything that Ms. Bryant talked about. And then Nicole
I'm familiar with the programs. I'm familiar with the programs. I just think, how are we, have we started to identify the contractors that are going to, or that can potentially benefit from this project, though? That's the question, right?
Yes, absolutely. That is the broad,
Can
both
I-
of our broad focuses.
Can I get a point of information? Point of information along the same line of questioning. The Office of Equal Opportunity, there's a portal. 'Cause I know every time a development project goes through my district, and you know, folks come up and say, well, we can't find nobody to do this type of work, and we say, no. There's a portal and there's a list of particularly Black and brown women-owned businesses that are available that you can pull off this list that's minority certified. Can you elaborate on what that list looks like? Maybe give us the number that's on that list, and then I guess that dovetails into, obviously, you know, efforts to make sure those individuals are prepared. But from what I've been doing, a lot of those businesses are already prepared, whether it's the Sixers project or the Bellwether District project or the Goldenberg Group project. There's a list to pull from of active people chomping at the bit to do business with the city of Philadelphia. But elaborate on Councilman Young's line of questioning.
Thanks, Council President. Yes, so there is a list. The Office of Economic Opportunity holds a registry of certified businesses that are able to do the work, and it's identified by NAICS code. It's also important to note that within that registry, they have more, it's expansive beyond just our local program. They also have businesses that are registered with the Disadvantaged Business Entity Program, which is the federal program, the DBE program, and so there are also entities that are registered via that program within that registry as well. And so it is a very expansive list, and as you know, we are building capacity for businesses and businesses become registered, they will also be added to that list. So that's an ongoing thing.
And I just one more follow-up, Council President, if you don't
Sure.
mind, just regarding to this technical assistance, right, to get, to even be qualified as a minority, women-owned, disadvantaged business, you have to go through these certain steps and procedures in order to get that qualification, because, you know, the law firm I was at, all Black lawyers, we not certified, so we can't say we're a minority firm because we didn't go through the certification process. So how are you helping those businesses go through that certification process in order so those folks can check those boxes off?
I second his line of questioning.
That's a great question, and I can follow up and hopefully get you information from OEO as well. But generally, I believe the question is, how are we, can you repeat your question? I'm sorry.
The question is, how do we make sure that minority businesses that want to participate, you can't do business with the city of Philadelphia unless you're minority certified. That's a process, right? I do give a nod to SEPTA. SEPTA at one point in time controlled that process, right? How are we preparing to help minority businesses become certified so they can actually participate on this project?
Yep, so Commerce and OEO, they both have programs, right? And when they're added to those programs, one of the things that they're trying to do and they're aiming at doing is building capacity. And so I know that there are gaps in the system, and I think that those are gaps that we figure out over time, right? And then we identify those businesses and we walk them through the process. There's also a lot of resources. I know, for example, OEO does MedWeek, which is Minority Enterprise Development Week. And through that MedWeek, they do a lot of marketing to businesses trying to capture people who are not already registered. And I think that there's a deeper issue, right, but beyond that. A lot of times, businesses aren't registered because of accounting and different things that you have to be able to share with places such as the Enterprise Center. And I think that what they're doing right now is preparing those businesses and helping to give the systems that they need so that they have the documents available to them so that they can be certified and then thus added to the registry.
I would just add that through our work with the African American Chamber, through our work with the African American Chamber of Commerce, one of the recommendations specifically in their research was to create resources and programs to ensure that businesses had support to become certified if they were not. So that's also on our roadmap as well.
for that? I'm sorry, so will the Sixers be paying for that, or is that something that has to come out of the company, the contractor's pocket, the city's pocket? Like,
What I just referenced in the programs that we were talking about would be the work that we would be doing with the African American Chamber of Commerce that we would be paying for, funded through the CBA. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Councilmember Jones.
Mr. President and Member Young, thank you for your line of questioning. It got nostalgic about my days at the Minority Business Enterprise Council. To extend their line of questioning, two things. One, I know we have a robust list of minorities, females, disadvantaged businesses. I liked your original testimony. Back when I did it, we didn't have cell phones, so your technology is better than what I experienced. But I would encourage you, will there be an effort to do several things? Create meaningful joint ventures, not just as subs and not even as primes, but joint ventures with companies that currently do not have the capacity, that do not have the finance to take on a big chunk. But if you paired them with another business, they might have the capacity. Is that in your plan?
Yes. Yes. So, yes. So it is in the plan. I think, I know specifically in this plan, we also discussed the bundling, right? So we understand that some of the portions of this project are going to be large and expansive, where some minority, disabled, and women businesses won't have capacity to do the project in whole. And so as a result, we contemplated that. We broke it down explicitly within the EOP, and we referenced places in which the Sixers could debundle to make the project smaller to obtain participation. There is also an outline for joint venture counting as well, where they're credited for the amount that they've actually contributed to the project, and I can let you guys speak to that.
That's an important aspect.
Yeah, and before I kick it to Alex and David, I do want to say again, there's a mosaic of programs, in addition to what Commerce is doing, in addition to minority business success. This is what they are focused on, which is removing the barriers, right? Building capacity, finding the joint ventures that are helpful and not tokenism, right? And not pass-throughs. And that is something we are laser focused on. And I'll kick it over.
I want to go on the record and say, because I give credit where credit is due, at least when Rene Garcia says that you're going to address tokenism and pass-throughs, I do believe that in terms of the work that you've done with U City Homes, that you will aggressively follow up and make sure that the city of Philadelphia isn't being duped in supporting businesses that aren't necessarily supporting diversity, equity, inclusion. Councilmember Jones?
Thank you, Mr. President. The other aspect of being successful, what I remember on the CJC, we did that. That was our big contract back in my day. But I remember getting a contractor, a prime contract, that was too big for him to swallow. And he wound up begging us to take him off that job because he didn't calculate right, didn't do his estimates right, ran into change orders that killed him. So what I'm asking, in part, is are we creating factoring programs or accounts receivable financing programs so that if someone gets a big contract, they can get some startup money to successfully buy materials, employ people? Is that a part of the plan?
Yes, it's a great point, it's a great question. So there's a number of things that can be done. The concept has a couple different terms, impressed account or DACA, but things that help set up working capital accounts on projects for smaller contractors to allow for faster payment, right? So, sometimes it's about they can't wait for 30 or 60 or 90 days, and how can you get someone the ability to work on a project and help with their cash flow? Those are specific concepts I've implemented in the past and that we've contemplated for this project.
So where is that? Is that in the CBA? Where can that be found?
So that's not in the CBA. I believe that is referenced in the EOP in terms of the variety of tools that we
EOP, got
would
it.
be using.
Makes sense.
In order to make sure that we accomplish the goals and address the very real challenges we know smaller contractors have.
But the factoring part as well?
I believe-
See, I believe you, but I definitely believe her.
I'm sorry, Councilman, can you explain when we say the factoring part?
So when, when companies get a big project, let's round it up to $250,000, and to start up for a small business, that might require a third of that being in cost up front. A bank will, once the security is the contract coming from the city of Philadelphia, or in this case, 76ers. So that's good as a government checking and serves as collateral. And so if you're willing, you'd have to be willing to do it, but somebody has to assure that we are doing it. And so whatever arrangement with a lending institution, a bank, has to be established so that there's an agreement afoot that says when 76ers issue a contract, we will factor a third of it to start up, or 1/5 of it, whatever those terms and conditions are. But that's something that has to be in place in order for these businesses to feel comfortable to even bid on it.
And what we've heard in the past, because I personally have been involved in these discussions, again, with Minority Business Success, is that it's really the insurance and the bonding that are tripping them up specifically. And so that is what we have worked to put into the agreement. And I'll turn it over to the Sixers who are,
So we're cutting a deal right now.
the insurance and the
Right now on
bonding.
the floor.
The pool of insurance that we've been working towards for the small businesses, because what we've seen are the insurance and the bonding have been the limitations.
Yes.
Yes, and so that's included.
So yes, like in, use your words, so that it gets on the record. Yes, like in yes, what?
I believe what you're referring to, Renee, is that within the CBA, and there's an allocation that would be aimed to go to help fund those specific things for small businesses bidding on this project or others.
My friends behind me say it's line 15.
So that's it, but
Yeah.
that will give Member Young a little more comfort that what we say we're going to do, we're actually going to be able to do. I remember in one of our first briefings, Member Young passionately talking about, this is deja vu, we've been here before, people say what they say, and then the reality is different. Each and every one of these components, there's no guarantee for success, but you have a better chance of success with these tools in the toolbox. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Member Jones. The chair recognizes Councilman Ketty Lozada.
I actually turned off my button because I was
Okay.
gonna
'Cause it was
kind of
going on
pass,
and off.
but
Wanted to
I
make
did
sure.
receive a text here, and I'm gonna keep saying this, and I'm probably gonna sound like a broken record, right? I'm receiving text messages because my community's watching, right? And at no time, while we understand that Philadelphia is a black city, Latinos exist, we're here. No one has been able to talk to Latinos in the city about how they see themselves in this project. No one has been able to talk about this project and how it impacts communities beyond Center City. I represent a district where 55% of the population is Latino. And so, and we work, we're entrepreneurs, we're union members, you know, we are accountants, we are attorneys, we are a lot. And so I need to be able to respond to people who are saying to me, at what point do people start talking about brown people in this city? And how do we become a part of the economic opportunity that we are talking about here, right? I need to be able to go back into my community and say that out of this project that is supposed to be such an amazing project, that we are included in here. And so can you please, number one, be a little bit more conscious about when you're speaking, right? Because again, we are a black city. I respect my black brothers and sisters. When I'm advocating and I'm fighting, for anything in the 7th Council District, I recognize that I represent more than just Latinos, while I represent 55% of the people in my district that look like me, right? I recognize that. I recognize that I represent women, and you all responded to Member Young here about minority contracting, but if in the language it doesn't talk about you all helping people become minority certified, and they look at a document that says you have to be minority certified in order to participate, they're not going to participate because they're like, well, I'm not minority certified. Nowhere are you saying that you're going to help people in that process, right? And so I just want you all to be a little bit more conscious when you're sitting there, because not only am I frustrated, but my people are frustrated too.
Understood, and thank you, Councilmember, for the feedback, and definitely taken and appreciated. So I just want to be very clear and to get this on the record. Everything that we have discussed over this discussion that we've been having around minority and women participation absolutely applies to the Latino community as well. And so when we talk about programs like Everybody Builds, when we talk about programs to prepare small businesses to operate within the arena, when we talk about programs to get them certified as a women or minority-owned business, the Latino community is absolutely a major piece of that. We know that's the fastest growing population within the city. We know that it is very important to the cultural and diverse fabric of Philadelphia, and as a result, it's incredibly important that that community benefits from the economic opportunities that we're talking about with this project.
Councilmember, if there's anything any follow-up that you have for the administration about our outreach with the Hispanic chambers, but also through, I know I sound like a broken record now, but through commerce and minority business success, there's a big push in the Latino community, and particularly providing trainings and information in the native language, right? Which is something that we are all cognizant of, both in the Asian community, but in the Latino community. So we're happy to get you more information.
I appreciate that. I just want us to be a little bit more conscious when we are actually speaking about it, right? You know, and yes, there are other communities that are not, that may not be prepared to support, maybe are not as vocal to oppose, but there are other people who are watching and who live in our city, and we want to make sure that we are a welcoming city, right? We want to make sure that when we're talking about economic opportunity for all, we really mean that. And so we have to just be a little bit more conscious when we are sharing the information that we're inclusive.
Agreed 100%, and Councilwoman, you've been very consistent about that, both in here and as we've had other conversations outside of chambers, and I know that we've had some follow-up conversations already with groups that you've recommended to make sure that we do have adequate outreach and engagement from that community, so thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes Councilman Jamie Gaultier, then Councilman Ru Lantau, and that's it for this round.
I wanted to follow up on the council president's line of questioning maybe a few minutes ago. I wanted to know if law could expound on clawbacks, penalties, and the array of tools that we could use if we're not seeing the progress that we want to see in the economic opportunity plan. So can you just talk in a more extensive way about the array of tools and when we might use those different tools?
Yes, so thank you. The specific provision is 171606. Within it, it specifically states that we do have remedies such as withholding payment or any part thereof pending corrective action, terminating a contract in whole and part, suspending a participant, contractor, or recipient of financial assistance from bidding on or participating in future city contracts for up to 3 years, and recovering damages as outlined within the plan, or in this case, the sublease. And so those are things that we can implement. I think that the key here in this economic opportunity plan are the reporting mechanisms, because we will be able to see what the reporting looks like, what the participation looks like, closer to real time than we have in the past. Specifically, monthly, there's monthly reporting, there's quarterly reporting, there's annual reporting, and those are going to the oversight committee as well. So when there is an area of opportunity in which there isn't something being accomplished, it's something that we can specifically call out and come to the Sixers with.
Can you give us just an idea of when might we use those tools? What kind of situation would we have to see to move towards debarment or to move towards saying you are suspended from bidding on all city contracts? What kind of things would we be looking for to use those type of tools?
That's a great question. So on site, the Sixers are also required to hire an independent economic opportunity plan monitor, so an EOP monitor. And that person is someone who is trained in the field on how to look at economic opportunity plans and interpret what's going on at the site. That person will also be having reporting as well that's supposed to go to the oversight committee. And so based on the recommendations that we get from that person, as well as OEO, who sits on the oversight committee, who are experts in the field and know what it looks like when someone is trying to be a pass-through entity or get around goals, they would be the experts that are at the table in order to make those recommendations. In addition, we did debar recently as well, so we are familiar with the debarment process and telling a contractor when they're acting as a pass-through entity, hey, we are serious about this, and the court upheld our debarment decision.
And I'll specifically talk about what I'm looking for. If you're lying, right? If you're submitting numbers that are not correct, and we're going to know because of the amount of reporting that's going on, follow the money, right? So that really gets to the pass-through question of, okay, you got this person on here, specifically how much is this minority partner getting paid out? Like, that's what I want to know. Okay. Are they a name only? And, you know, we mentioned tokenism. I think a lot of us in this room have been tokened, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't get the opportunity. And this happens in the law all the time. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, there's a member of the law department on the oversight committee, and as long as I'm around, right, this will be scrutinized because I have no patience for this. I have no tolerance for this. And if we have to move to debarment, I will do it, right? We've done it once. We will do it again. So that's what I'm looking for, right? And if we're following up and following up and following up and we're not getting any communication and it's not getting better and I feel like there's a hole being dug, like that's when we're going to be pushing. And we want to work with people, and there will be folks who are not meeting their targets that need coaching, and maybe they need support. Maybe they need help from, you know, one of these programs. Maybe they need help from Minority Business Success or Commerce or whatever it is. But I think we're going to be able to tease out who is trying and who's trying to skirt the rules.
Okay, and you're a tough woman. I concur with what the council president said. I do think even if we don't work it out in this particular hearing, it might be helpful for the committee to have some benchmarks, right? These are, you know, if we don't see X, we would consider Y, right? Since such a big part of what is being sold here are the minority jobs.
Yep, and on that point, we have proposed some amendments that are with Council President's office right now. And specifically, from the feedback that we have gotten from all of you, including the majority leader who's not here today, we have mandated that the committee within 60 days of their first meeting publish their, I didn't use the word bylaws, but their governance. Like, what is all of this going to look like? How often are they meeting? What's a quorum look like? Who are their officers going to be? But also the guidelines for how they are going to govern themselves when they're looking at the data. So all of that needs to be made public, and of course, City Council has a chair on that committee as well.
You're welcome. Sounds like a scorecard in the future, not only just for 76ers Place, but on just how we do business and doing a litmus test of who are meeting their goals and who aren't. And obviously, it's still private industry, but when you come through City Council for some level of zoning or support, it becomes a public good where we're required to make sure folks are held accountable. The chair recognizes lastly, Councilman Rulandell.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the great work on the EOP, and most of my colleagues have asked a lot of the questions that I wanted to ask, but I do want to underscore a lot of even what you're saying. The more work we do up front, the better and easier best and good faith efforts become. It should be easy pipelines if we can really lay this all down now and create this, these pipelines to make sure that we are going to have the most inclusive workforce. And And I'm all about putting best practices down in writing. Why not? They are not mandated quotas. They are just, expectations, best practices. This is what we think you should be at certain points. But one question that hasn't been answered for me is, in most of the documents, if not all, the number for local participation has been at 30%. Why is it so low?
Is that in reference to I think it's for the operational employment numbers?
I saw in most of the categories that we had, the pre-construction, construction, over and over again, it kept saying local participation, the goal is 30%, and I personally think it should be much higher. So I'm wondering why it has been that low. Was there a reason? And I would certainly like to see that percentage higher.
Understood. So the numbers that I'm seeing for local participation are on the construction workforce side. And so what we looked at there, and I will note that on the apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship side, it's 50. And the rationale there was in consultation with various trades, understanding what membership looks like today and where members live. Knowing that for anybody who's going to be a journey person on the project, they're probably in a trade right now. So that was the rationale for the 30%, but then the 50% is reflective of the intentionality and dedication and commitment to growing the local share of members within the trades, and that's why the apprenticeship piece is at 50%.
Okay. I really do hope we can keep those goals increasing.
Agreed.
Because we want to keep our strong union workers in Philadelphia. Thank you.
Councilmember Young, do you like to be recognized? Okay.
Thank you. Just have a question about the competing facilities clause. I know the city has like a program through the Philadelphia Energy Authority, the CPACE program, right? And it's like a loan for energy efficiency projects to update projects, things like that. And so I know in my district, the Met used this particular loan in order to rehab itself, and it's administered by the city. So, and the Met, in my opinion, would be a competing facility with this particular arena. So if there are theaters like the Met, like the Uptown Theater, like other theaters that want to participate in the city loan program, will the city be obligated to then pay the Sixers that same amount of money because it's a competing facility?
We have specifically carved out when the city is acting as a conduit for federal funds, state funds, foundation, wherever the money is coming, specifically carved out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
You're
Mr. President.
Thank you. There are no more questions from members of this committee. We will now recess this hearing. The chair recognizes Councilmember Mark Squilla. Excuse me. I recognize Councilmember Mark Squilla for a motion to recess the public hearing and public meeting to Thursday, December the 5th at 8:30 a.m. The chair recognizes Councilman Mark Squilla.
So moved, Mr. President.
Is there a second? It has a moving property seconded that the committee of the whole will be recessed until Thursday, December the 5th at 8:30 a.m. All those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the ayes have it. The motion carries, and the committee of the whole stands in recess until Thursday, December the 5th at 8:30 a.m. Thank you, everybody, for your attention.